Well, you'd better check your wallets because you're about to get hijacked one more time by the big banks. And the sad thing is, it's the same culprit from 2008, CDSs. The difference this time around is that it's not our own bad subprime mortgage debt from housing that will have Uncle Sam dipping into your pocket. No, this time it'll be credit default swaps on European debt, underwritten by American banks, that will have the politicians scrambling to convince you that it is in your best interest to bail them out yet again. Here, I'll explain. See, over the last year, European banks have quietly been dumping their European sovereign debt CDS exposure onto American banks. As a quick reminder, a CDS contract, which you can see from our glossary, is like an insurance policy on a bond that pays out if the bond insurance defaults. It's like buying insurance when you're gambling playing 21. It's not a smart bet. But so long as the bond issuer doesn't default, then the CDS seller can make a ton of money selling their insurance contracts, kind of like what AIG did back in 2008. But just like any old greedy newbie trader, the US banks have outdone themselves and have piled into this trade with reckless abandon. For some perspective, American bank exposure to European sovereign debt is about 181 billion. But American bank exposure to European credit default swaps is a staggering $787 billion. Now, we have 5 American banks that underwrite about 97% of all credit default swaps in the US. Guess who? JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, B of A, and Citigroup. If things do not go exactly right for them, each of these American banks could be fighting for their very lives. Up until yesterday, US banks thought that they were in the clear because the way that the European bailout of Greece was structured prevented holders of credit default swaps from collecting on their insurance premiums. The restructuring of the Greek debt was considered to be voluntary, and so the CDSs wouldn't be triggered. Now, as a side note, you should know that there is a ruling body called the International Swaps and Derivative Association, or ISDA, that determines if a credit default swap should be triggered or not. But guess what? Guess who runs the ISDA? Yep, it's headed up by 10 megabanks, 5 of which are the world's largest underwriters of CDSs. Do you think that they will vote against themselves? I don't think so. Of course they won't. Greek bondholders are to take a 50% loss under the European plan, and yet somehow the big banks are able to label it as voluntary decision by the bondholders, and thereby they get to skirt having to pay out on their CDS contracts. See, it's a completely rigged game where it's basically heads I win, tails you lose. However, all of that inside nonsense may be for naught, and the banks could be facing their very own doomsday. In fact, I'm convinced that they are. All you need to do is look to the dominoes that are right behind Greece. Now, Greece's prime minister's unilateral decision to hold a national vote on the proposed bailout throws a big bank's carefully crafted planning right out the window. It opens up for the very real possibility of an actual default that the banks will not be able to gloss over. They will have to pay out on their credit default swaps if the Greek public fails to ratify the European-sponsored bailout. This in turn will trigger more weakness in the rest of the so-called pig debt, potentially leading to more defaults that will trigger even more CDS losses. Do you see how the domino effect is happening? Now, should this occur, it will be a staggering blow to the U.S. banking system, certainly on par with what we saw in 2008, and in a Sovereign Alliance's opinion, it'll be 10 times worse. But don't buy it for a second when the banks insist that they are hedged out. Yeah, they're hedged, but they're hedged with other banks the same way that everybody was hedged with AIG. There isn't enough money in the banking system to cover these hedges. And if Greek vote fails, we could see the entire global banking system collapse. But of course it won't collapse, because the world's governments will step in there with your money to save all of the banks. Just go read the headlines. It's so obvious. They're waiting to influx more money, and then go watch our video on why you need to buy gold and join our membership and the so we can recommend the best solutions for you. Because believe you me, QE4 is coming. Now, if by some miracle the Greek vote passes, then the banks may escape this terrible fault. When we say Greek vote miracle, what we mean is there's going to be some under the table bribes and some threats. But if you don't, then look out below. But the 2008 market lows may look expensive after the market is done revaluing the banks. The reality is we're faced with the greatest transfer of wealth in history, and being informed is half the battle. The second half of the battle is taking massive immediate action like our members at the Sovereign Alliance. For more information on how you can benefit and live the life of your dreams,